Welcome. Hello, MACC members. I'm Laurel Hansen, MACC's Program and Member Engagement Manager. And welcome to Ask MACC Workforce Edition podcast, brought to you by the Metropolitan Alliance of Connected Communities. We know our network is faced with ongoing and incredible challenges when it comes to workforce. Our workforce is how we provide valuable services to the community, but our workforce challenges can create difficult hurdles for organizations to operate sustainably. There can be complex and seemingly insurmountable barriers to deal with. And that's why at MACC we launched the Workforce Solutions Initiative. And that includes these bite-sized recorded conversations about workforce issues, along with the resources that we offer in our Workforce Solutions Hub. Now, during this brief conversation, I'm joined by Carl Schlueter, Executive Director of MACC member Banyan Communities. Thanks for being with me today, Carl.
Thank you for having me, Laura. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, thanks so much. So when we met and talked earlier this year, you really piqued my interest with your workforce approaches at Banyan Communities. And I'm excited to dive in a little deeper into that conversation with you today. So let's talk about workplace culture. Before we do that, though, help us get to know you a little more and tell us a little bit about Banyan and, if you would, how you view your leadership role there.
Sure. Banyan is a community development organization. Our mission is to develop youth, strengthen families, and create community here in the Phillips neighborhood of South Minneapolis. And we've been located here, rooted in this neighborhood for over 25 years. I think one thing that's unique about Banyan is we use an asset-based approach within a holistic model. And so by that, I mean that we see the possibilities, the opportunities, the skills, and the strengths of our youth and our families and our neighbors, and not simply the problems or challenges that might surface or arise. So we see in one another kind of this collective efficacy that we can also come together to seek solutions and create opportunities for one another. And it's holistic in the sense that we understand within neighborhoods live families, and within families live children. And so our approach is to engage all three of those areas simultaneously. The through line to the work that we do really is after school enrichment programming. And the primary lever that we pull in order to address that complex problem of poverty is education. And so we have a 100% graduation rate from high school. And
Wow.
Then we also support our high school graduates to pursue a post-secondary pathway that they find fulfilling and that will lead to a family-sustaining career.
Very nice. And how long have you been at the helm there at Banyan?
Almost 2 years now. And much of my background prior to Banyan was in K-12 education. Teaching and then administration. But I've always been connected and involved with nonprofits, primarily in the arts and education, serving on boards or supporting boards or volunteering my time.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for sharing that. Thanks for letting us get to know you a little bit. So over the 2 years that you've been here, you've started to see some positive trends with Banyan's workforce. And as you've shared with me, things have been relatively steady. Staff retention has been good. What do you attribute that to? Because I have to tell you that that's not the story we hear everywhere right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll just share briefly that right before our interview, we were having our lunch bunch. So we get together as a staff for a community meal after every monthly staff meeting. But in addition to that, we have a soup club in the fall and we have a lunch bunch in the winter, and we share the responsibility. We pair up two staff members and they create different dishes to share. So it just gives us an opportunity to be together personally and relationally in that space. And I think that is just one of those experiences that really can lend itself to a healthy and positive culture. With respect to our retention, I really look at a few things. One, compensation. And we want to make sure that we're looking at salaries and making sure that we're within the range of what's competitive based upon the market and the work that we do. But we also want to look at our benefits and offering our staff really good medical benefits. In addition to that, there's the paid time off and making sure that our staff have ample time for personal time and vacation time, and then including some flexible scheduling within that as well. So that I think is really important. There are two other pieces, though, and I'm reminded of a study that MIT did several years ago that if you can get compensation within a competitive range, then what most staff or employees are looking for in an organization are a few other things. One, they want to be inspired by the mission, right? So they really want a mission-driven organization that they can really get behind. And number two, they want meaningful professional development. They want to be coached. They want to grow. They want to get better at what they're doing. And then thirdly, they want autonomy. They want some level of independence in decision making and determining the trajectory of whatever department or program they may be participating in. So we make sure that we're allowing for those opportunities and resources as well.
You've got quite the spectrum there from those sort of quality professional things all the way to the other side, which are the fun things. Though I'm going to definitely borrow the lunch bunch idea. That's wonderful. When you talk about competitive compensation, do you ever look outside of the nonprofit sector when you're pricing those jobs?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think the short answer is no. We do, but the study that we use is Minnesota Council of Nonprofit study, and I think they do really well at disaggregating, according to budget size and type of organization and geographic location. So we find that to be kind of a standard reference that we use for.
And you can benchmark against that.
Yeah, exactly.
I also love your comment about autonomy, and I think sometimes that gets lost in the mix. That we're all adult professionals, and we want to be trusted, and we want the opportunity to make decisions, and that'll get you to work every day with those challenges that keep things fresh. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. So you've shared some of the tools and approaches, but how would you describe the culture at Banyan as a workplace?
I asked our leadership team members what they thought, right? And I think that's indicative of the kind of organization culture we want to be, is to allow opportunity for input and feedback and other perspectives. So, and what we kind of arrived at, as just the higher level takeaways is that, inclusivity is really important. And broadly speaking, right? So lived experiences, knowledge, skills, perspectives, styles of thinking and leading, right? So that's really important to us, to be mindful of everyone who's in the room and what they bring to the table. The other thing we landed on was just being intentional. And so as a community development organization, what we mean by that is the decisions we make and the programmatic changes we might consider, or the new initiatives we might implement, we understand that those take time. We've heard that phrase, move at the pace of trust, right? But really, that is the heart of what we do. So we're really a relational organization, and building trust is so important with our youth and families and with our neighbors, so that when we get to a point where we have to make a consequential decision around post-secondary pathway, or if we have to engage in a complex problem like our unhoused neighbors, right, in a homeless encampment, or if we're needing to engage our families around a particular problem or challenge in a positive, constructive way. Relationships have to be in place first, and so does trust. So our families are with us for about an average of 9 years. And just to circle back to the staff retention piece, right? We will only grow and succeed and continue to kind of be able to share our impact and outcomes as long as we have high retention among our staff, and particularly our educators, because there needs to be that trusting relationship with our youth. So we're really intentional about that. Sure, we have to move at the pace of courage sometimes, right? And sometimes we have to be responsive and decisive. But for the most part, outside of that, we really take time because we want to start things well, and we want to be able to sustain them.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That speaks volumes about the culture there and the intentionality of how you built it, and that inclusivity of feeling like there isn't just only one way to be and one way to lead. I think that sounds great, and it's frankly quite inspiring and very thoughtfully approached. And I think you're seeing in your results, like you said, that turnover and the chaotic disruption of constantly rebuilding relationships with new players, and that could be just for the type of work you do. I feel like that's a priority you've put into place, and sort of everything falls after that. Everything sort of comes out from that. And so if you can figure out that, like what's the lever that makes this work? And to start in that place with your people, I think it's easy to always say the client or the customer, like we start with them, but when you start internally with a strong culture, I think it all can flow from there. So I've heard you talk about compensation. You've addressed that in your organization, identified opportunities. You've pursued those market rate adjustments. You've invested in benefits. Those are all really solid approaches. And I know how that's not easy because you're still in the nonprofit sector and you're still struggling to create a model that, a financial model that allows you to do that. And I think all of our MACC members can attest to the challenges of that. So how have you figured that out? Like how have you been able to prioritize those steps and make space for them in what is a very demanding financial scenario as a nonprofit?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's a continual challenge, right? Among nonprofits. It's a difficult landscape we're in. And the revenue generation cycle, the funding cycle is a continuous one. And I think that what we've discussed here and what we've kind of developed in terms of an approach, number one, stepping back, we've got some tremendous partners who've been with us for a long time. And I think those are our individual donors. Those are our foundation partners, private and family foundations, our corporate partners, and then also our government, grant awards that we have. And we do understand them in a relational context as partners, right? And so as partners in relationship, I think that we try to be really honest and transparent, not only about, achieving our outcomes or our successes, but I think, good, honest, trusting relationships also share where they've come up short and where they need to grow and where maybe where they've tried and failed and what they've learned from it. And I think that really matters because people are more willing to invest, right, and share funds and resources if they believe they can trust an organization in the fullest sense. We try to keep our revenue sources balanced. We don't want to be too over-reliant upon one or another. I think that's true from all those funding streams I mentioned, and in some different ways true of government funding, right? Because oftentimes there's a spend down date there, and so that brings to bear conversations around staff and new staff and whether or not you can compensate them beyond the end of a particular grant award, right? So we take that really seriously, right? I think that I just think understanding our funding, our funding partners as relationships that are valuable to us, balancing our revenue streams, and I think too more and more we've been asking our partners for general unrestricted funds.
Yeah, how's that going?
It's actually going pretty well because we're sharing the story both in our impact reporting and elsewhere, what we just talked about earlier, that we are not going to continue to have the transformative impact, or deeper lasting change without high quality staff who are staying here, right?
Right.
In doing the work. One depends upon the other. And so we have to understand that core mission support, and then we have to fund that. And there has to be, again, the belief that we will be responsible in stewarding our funds, right? And making sure that we can be flexible in decisions around funding in terms of where we need to allocate our resources.
Yeah, I'm encouraged to hear that. It's definitely a journey and a path that as a network of nonprofits, MACC is on to work with funding partners and to help them see the reality of what it takes to do the business of nonprofits and the services that we provide, and to be transparent about that. And it's something we can do collectively as we move forward together in this work. So I understand you implemented something you referred to as a culture survey at Banyan. And so that piqued my interest too. I've seen plenty of employee surveys. What made this one different? What were your goals, and what'd you learn from that?
Sure. The original survey was administered just prior to me starting at Banyan, and in the midst of a pretty challenging turnover in leadership. And so, as you can imagine, that particular survey presented the actual culture and the ideal culture based upon a series of responses by staff. And there was a significant gap between the actual culture they were experiencing at that time and the ideal future culture they envisioned and wanted at Banyan Community. And so we pulled out a few things to focus on from that. One of the things that I think was really interesting was there was a high level of kind of criticism among the culture. So that critical factor, which may be well intended, if it comes down too fast or too forcefully on a creative idea or a vulnerable suggestion, well, that's going to make it really hard to develop the kind of collegial working relationships that are necessary at a nonprofit organization. So we stepped back and reflected upon that. And in addition to that, wanted to, on the ideal side, create more of an encouraging, more humanistic culture that supported people as they learned and as they grew and allowed them to fail. And embedded in that kind of piece around the critical factor and kind of the encouraging piece, we had to wrestle with some passive aggressive behaviors, that sometimes can be natural to human nature, but also conflict avoidance, right?
You are in Minnesota, so
right, I know, right? So avoiding certain communications with certain individuals because you want to avoid the conflict, but we know the conflict doesn't go away; it just manifests itself elsewhere. So what we did was create more direct channels of communication between and among different departments and people. So there was a structure to it. We set working agreements for our meetings and relied upon collaborative norms, right? And we surveyed our teams. At the beginning, how are we doing on these working agreements? What do we need to kind of improve on? Which areas? And then, at the end of a cycle, surveying again and seeing how we did and whether we made progress or not. And we did make progress. We worked at it. We talked about it a lot. And it was, again, really deliberate work. And I think when we talk about culture as the engine that kind of drives an organization's outcome, that's what I believe it does. High functioning teams really are the gears. And there's great resources around how you create high functioning teams. And so I think that it's a work in progress. We still have challenges here and there, but at least we're being honest and kind of taking it head on and, committing to it.
It's interesting how you've gone through this. So you have like a case study right here, and you talk about resources. So I'm just going to put a shout out to you if you have anything that you think would be helpful to share with other MAC members. Our hub's a great place for us to share that and to make it available. If it's like, were you ever inspired by some sort of article or process document or something that really helped you as a team walk through that's open access? Send it my way. I'd love to share it out. Was your team, was anyone on, were any of your employees like surprised? Like, wait, you're asking me? Like, was that, when you started, we're going to do these things and we're going to have these work agreements and then we're going to ask you now, we're going to ask you later, were they ever like, wow, you care? You want to hear what I have to say?
Yeah, right. You care, right? Yes. We had our leadership team now we define as our directors and managers, but everyone in the organization is a leader, right? And that Brene Brown understanding of seeing the promise or potential in someone else and removing any barriers to their opportunity to kind of fully realize their own leadership potential. But with our directors and manager meetings, we then, and only recently, developed working agreements with our managers as well. And one thing that struck me, and I connected it to a prior MACC workshop that I attended on using on power, right? Is that the managers felt that directors would be down the road of decision making so far whereby when they were asked for their feedback or input, it seemed perfunctory. It seemed like a formality. And so they rightly requested us to be involved earlier in the decision-making process. So their input, their power in a positive sense, could influence the decision-making process sooner. Understanding that we have shared decision-making and then we have different roles and responsibilities that will allow for various levels of decision-making. But I thought that was a really great takeaway of just wanting in those working agreements to bring discussions at an earlier stage and before we start kind of framing out the decision we'll make.
It's great. It's great to see like a practical outcome, because sometimes we all, it can be very philosophical and this is what we believe, but to really see where the rubber hits the road and where the practical daily work occurs and how your culture influences that. I think that's really interesting. And I appreciate hearing that example. I know we just have a little more time with you. I do have a couple more questions. Where does succession planning and cross-training come into this? Because if you're, building a culture where people are developing and being able to stretch their leadership, then, there's opportunities there for people to grow and succession planning. And do those fit in at Banyan? Do you talk about them? Do you practice them?
Yeah, we're working on them right now. And going back to that culture survey, I think the community and organization experienced, a situation where perhaps there wasn't, sufficient cross-training or succession planning, in place. And so we've since, it's a strategic planning initiative, and we've since really focused on a draft succession plan and really concrete cross-training. And it's not easy to do. And it's not easy to create time and space for because it makes people uncomfortable. Wait, you're thinking about how the community and organization, its mission and vision can continue in my absence. And that's the key, right? That's the key because it must. The mission always must come before me. And although each one of us is integral to the work that Banyan does, that work is greater than any one of us. And so at the crux of our care for our community and our organization and the youth and families and neighbors, it would be irresponsible not to have a succession plan in place and to cross-train around it. It's better when it's done in a healthy culture where there is trust and people don't feel as if they're made insecure in their positions, right? So we're working on it right now, and whether that's in development, whether we're inviting more of our educators into site visits by funders or with funders, whether we are expanding our internal controls financially, so different people are getting an idea of how payroll is run, for instance, or whether programmatically we have backups in place. So if an educator or a staff member is out, somebody else is willingly kind of filling in and learning about that position. So here at Banyan, we've hired or promoted in the past year and a half, I believe, 3-4 former Banyan youth, right? So
Nice.
that's really important to us. And then also on our board, creating positions for a parent, a scholar in a post-secondary program, and a community member to be on the board. So there's a piece of this that also involves, I think, representation, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Well, and when you're talking about those cross training opportunities, how much more interesting does that make our daily experiences if we're not in a silo all the time? Like, let me breathe, let me out, let me learn. So yeah, that's great. It's been wonderful to hear about how you approach workplace culture at Banyan Communities, and I do feel like in our midst we've got a really learned example here with you and your team and the work that you've been doing to develop that. So I'm really grateful to have that within the MACC network. I know you're not the only one, but it's great to be able to identify and share that through this podcast. And what else would you share with other MACC leaders when it comes to developing workplace culture? I'm giving you the space for some final words and advice, words of wisdom.
There are a lot of resources out there. There's books, there's training materials, there's toolkits. I still think that it's a feel too, because I know this when we have visitors or guests or funders who step inside our space, you can't fake it. Like at some point, people are going to know whether or not there's an open, inclusive, honest, hardworking, good-humored culture in place. And it can be long, hard, slow work. It's day-to-day work, but it's worth it, and it has to be prioritized, and you can't compromise it, or your organizational outcomes will, you'll risk compromising them, I think, in the long run. And at the heart of it, we've talked about this as relationships, right? And relationships, our best ones, our most valuable ones, they take work. They don't come easy, right? And so I just think understanding that and having the right expectations around, the pace at which relationships form and the time it takes to develop trust. And then just keep it, we come to work and we do this challenging work at nonprofits. We want to work alongside people with the same values, right? Who are kind, who are encouraging, who are fun, who are committed to the work too. And I think our culture, our norms, our practices, our policies, our beliefs can help create that kind of atmosphere, because the work is tough. And if we can do tough work alongside people we can depend upon and enjoy the company of, I mean, that can be gold.
That's wonderful. I love that. I love that lightness in the face of heavy work. I think there's room for that, and I appreciate that. Gosh, I could talk to you all day, but that's all the time we have now for this discussion. It's been really interesting. Appreciate your time and thoughts today, Carl. Thanks so much. It's great to hear from and learn from our MACC network leaders and members. I appreciate it. I will say, MACC members, you're encouraged to visit our Ask MACC workforce page in our online hub. We've got lots and lots of wonderful workforce resources there. You'll find a variety of information and links to helpful content. Plus, there are more podcast recordings as a part of this series. So check those out. And please keep in touch. We're here to support you and our network of MACC members. Thanks. Have a great day and be well. Goodbye.